So that's what I think is happening. Now, what I wanted to do is provide somebody that I respect in terms of their work that completely disagrees with me. And I'm going to play in part 2 a space that I was on this week where I was giving an update on the financial markets and the different impacts on the different markets in real time. And Ryan Dawson, who I respect for his work, came up and really, really aggressively disagreed with me. And it was really around who actually controls the world and our understanding of it. So we entered into a debate, and I'm going to play that debate right now. And I would like you in the comment section to tell me, is Ryan right or am I right? And I've provided my analysis for what I think. What we found out is I think people don't change their mind much. Those that believe Israel rule the world would agree with Ryan. Those that believe Israel is a strategic tool for the military-industrial complex and that this is really a managed transition and Israel propped up the dollar by wartime profiteering and Mick, then they may be aligned more with me. What I would say in terms of who Ryan Dawson is before we head over to the video. So Azad's going to play it in a bit. He'll get that ready. But on my blog on SimonDixon.com, you'll see various documentaries where I've referred to Ryan's work. If you go into my blog and you see there was a blog on from 9/11 to the White House, in there is a 4-hour documentary on who did 9/11 and the declassified documents and everything to understand that was an inside job and a false flag involving Mossad, CIA, and Saudi intelligence. That was Ryan Dawson's work. He's been at this for like 19 years. Also, when I have a blog, for example, is Trump blackmailed? Ryan Dawson's work is referenced in terms of, the Charles Kushner, Roy Cohn, Epstein blackmail operations that happened. That was, I refer to his blogs there. Also, the blog on JFK and the new mech, how Israel stole the bomb. That was using also some of Ryan Dawson's work. So I respect his work, but we have a different analysis in terms of who's on top of the chain and the financial flows. And this really represents a prevailing narrative. I also did a debate with Professor Zhang, who is getting a lot of attention right now for his predictions. And you can go to my blog or you can go to my YouTube and you can see the debate between me and Professor Zhang, where he believes that effectively we're moving to a world that's dominated by Israel and Pax Judaica. And I said we're moving to a world that is dominated by transnational capital. And the Middle East and the financial industrial complex will win out. You can see that debate. So what I want you to do is have people that disagree with me so that you can have your own critical thinking because I'm sharing my predictions. And so we're going to play a competing, explanation. Now, Ryan can be a bit colorful with language and he can be a bit aggressive. That's just his style. But, it was still a friendly debate. That got very heated. And so Ryan's thesis is that effectively Israel controls US policy and Zionism as an ideology is what's driving everything. And the war is effectively, this is a genuine power conflict. There's no orchestration and either Iran wins or Israel wins. And if Israel wins, we will enter into a world where Pax Judaica is in a battle versus anti-Zionist Iran. And this is a real battle, an ideological battle. And whoever wins this is being fought over ideology. And so what I'd like for you to make is, I'd like you as the audience to make a decision. Which framework do you think explains all of these events? I've given you my explanation in part 1. And now I'd like you to take that framework and compare it to Ryan Dawson's framework. And if you'd like to go over to some of my other videos, you can see Professor Zhang's framework as well. Because I only care about accuracy, not being right, so that I can help you make decisions and understand how the world really works. And then once you know how the world works, it's easier to build a plan based upon knowing the rules rather than based upon deception. So with that in mind, that was my full-blown analysis. Now, what I'll be doing is, if anyone wants to give shorter versions to people, please do share this content. If people like the details like me and you, please do share this content if you're still with me, with anyone else that likes the details. But also, we'll publish on my blog and on my YouTube channel, and on my X, and on Rumble as well, and on my podcast, on both Apple and Spotify, and basically AI version condensed down for people that need shorter whiteboard videos, or they need a like a 10-minute AI summary, or you can share this actual long version, and we put it all onto my blog. I've done that for all of the previous episodes where we were sharing this framework of me saying it would weaken Israel, weaken Iran, and weaken US bases. That was on the Gold blog, and all the different subjects, and where I follow the money. All of those are on SimonDixon.com. And if you register there, you can get a newsletter. I won't sell you anything. No sponsorship, no monetization, no adverts, no business agenda. I'm not here to sell you anything. I just want to share information so that you can understand how the world works from my perspective. And I also want to share with you competing perspectives. So without further ado, we're now going to go into part 2 of Simon Dixon Hard Talk Live. And we're going to be answering the question through a debate on X Spaces that answers the question, does Israel really control US foreign policy? And this is from my analysis, a debate between Ryan Dawson and myself. And I'm now going to play that for you. And you can decide, and let me know in the comments section, once you've said this, is Ryan right? Has he got the right framework? Or am I right? Have I got the right framework? I'm really curious what you have to say. So please do at the end of this also like, share, comment, and we're going to hand over to that space, and I'll be seeing you this time next week.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Let me give some market updates. Okay. So there are very, very exposed. So some of the LNG production ending in Qatar, and the Strait of Hormuz closure is very, very catastrophic for several regions if this continues. So the ones that are most impacted is Japan, South Korea. China is completely hedged short term, but if this actually went on for months, this would become a major issue for China. Um, and Europe is in a state of disaster as a result of this. So obviously, they, as a result of the Ukrainian war, have they were hedging away from their Russian their Russian imports. They still maintained some of the trade with Russia while pushing sanctions, and then at the same time, were trying to engage in escalating war. That is, that's game set match for Putin. Like Putin and America basically can continue the war. They can end the war. They can profit from Ukraine. They can carve up Ukraine. They can do whatever they want at this stage, because the U.S. stock market is loving the news of Europe becoming a LNG and dependency upon America. So the stocks of the oil companies, the LNG companies on the US stock market are propping up the market at the moment, as well as defense stocks. So there is definitely an element of profiteering, money printing, and that desire where Trump said, let's get the military budget leading up to this from 1 trillion to 1.5 trillion. He also, if you remember, started to attack those that were doing stock buybacks and executive pays. And so leading up to this, he was kind of signaling, I need you to deal with some of these shortages because there's a shit ton of money to be made from war. The Israeli stock market has done well as a result of that, because these are the two war stock markets. And also it's helping UK, Germany, and France stock market. So all of those are okay. In Asia, South Korea had a 12% crash. That's a major correction. That led to circuit breakers kicking in, which is when the market is crashing too hard. You have to have a circuit breaker to stop people and give a little pause on the economy as well. I got to check out what's happening in UAE because they closed the market for 2 days, and so they should be reopening today. I'll get an update on that. I forgot to actually check that one. But the Asian stock market, they're not liking this at all. The European and British stock market is just profiteering from war. The American stock market is profiteering from war. But the world is, we've kind of had a resurgence of neutral assets. So gold is kind of between all-time highs, around about that 5,200 to 5,300 mark. At its low, its recent low was just below 5,000. Half of that has been recovered as a result of people, this resurgence into neutral assets. The Bitcoin looked like this marked the bottom of the market. So from the moment this war started, Bitcoin started recovering from a low of 62,000 and is now approaching 72,000. So there seems to be early signs of a movement towards neutral assets with all of this uncertainty. Asian stock markets are not liking this at all. The countries that are exposed to this and countries that have a military industrial complex element to it are kind of propping up the market as well as the energy side. But Europe is being fully hook, line, and sinkered into US control. Whoever controls the energy controls the nation and controls the region. And so it used to be a Russia dependent, then it hedged into a Qatar dependent, and now Europe is becoming a US dependent, which kind of plays around that regional hegemon that America seems to be its new role in the world. Now, when the price of oil spiked on the news of the Strait of Hormuz closure, we only got, if you remember, I said that it would probably go up 10 to 15 points because there had already been 11 points leading up to the war from insiders. We've had a correction back down because it was starting to get out of control, but it never went, too far above that $80 mark. If you remember the Ukraine war, it went to a peak of about $125. And then Biden had to frantically go and have a meeting with MBS and say, please flood some oil onto the market. He drained all the strategic petroleum reserves because MBS worked with Putin and decided that the relationship with Biden wasn't something he wanted to bail out. And so America then drained all of its strategic petroleum reserves, about 130 million barrels, in order to try and cartel the inflation that resulted. America doesn't have that. So he could only, the strategic petroleum reserve is about half, it's increased, but it's half what it was at its peak, before Biden started draining it. And so Trump doesn't have that card. He could only release about 30 million barrels. Venezuela is non-impactful. It will take years of investment until that can make any type of difference. So it makes zero difference in the short term. So the ability to oppress the price of oil short term is in the hands of OPEC and China. But China is going to be, either they know how long this is going to go on for, or they will not release that oil onto the market because they're preparing for an extended war. My indications are, if you look at the statements from China, they've been putting out public statements that they don't want Iran to escalate this beyond what it is right now within the acceptable, confines. We've seen, if we get another week of Iran targeting U.S. assets, Israeli assets, and anything further to do with the cartels, any kind of oil and gas production, you'd expect by next week to start seeing capital outflow from the Gulf countries that would need to find a new home. At the moment, I think it's semi-contained, but how whether they react or not, whether they retaliate or not, is really going to, kind of determine whether there is a soft landing and an off ramps for everybody. The problem is if this is genuinely an environment for long term war, then in essence, in the war between America and China, China would be way more affected by a long term war, and America would benefit more from a long term war. In the short term, China wins this if America finds an off ramps and capitulates. And because all of the military bases across the Gulf countries have been, depending on the level of impact, because we're in the fog of war, we don't know, the extent to it. You would expect that those won't be rebuilt in the fashion that they were built before with full US dependency. You'd imagine that there would be some level of hedging, and those military bases either will never be rebuilt or there will be negotiated new technology. And so, with all the AI stuff that's happening right now, you imagine that the Gulf countries are going to have to be choosing between American data, American AI, Chinese data, Chinese AI. And so, they're really in a position of how do they rebuild this and how does that set the relationship between the China and America trade war at the moment. So, all this to say, the price of oil came back down today. The trigger for that was when Trump announced that he demanded the syndicate of insurers. Now, here's what's really interesting. We were debating throughout the last few days what would shutting down the Strait of Hormuz look like. We found out that it's just an announcement, but what's really interesting is it was actually the insurers, the banksters, that actually did the blockade. So there is a level of coordination or leverage or vested interest where rather than doing what historically the insurers have done, they literally made it where nobody could ship just through charging like 75% of value. So, the value of what's being shipped, which is basically the same as shutting down the Strait of Hormuz. So, what's interesting is Iran announced it, but it was the bankers and the insurance companies that enforced it. And so, what does that actually mean? So, Trump retaliated in what could have been a coordinated, could have been profiteering from the financial industrial complex, but definitely coordinated. China knew this was happening. The banksters knew this was happening. The oil companies knew this was happening. The Gulf countries leading up to this were actually taking like record levels of oil out of the region. And so you can look at those shipments, and there was a massive spike like weeks prior to this that was very unusual, implying the Gulf countries knew, implying Iran knew, implying China knew, implying America knew as well, because they did the Venezuelan action. So at the very highest levels of oil and financial power, they're 100% prepared, they're profiteering, they're loving it, and it's extraction of wealth from the average people that are not on the right side of these trades. But the oil price reacted very positively and kicked off, positive movement because the U.S. stock market was at that point of inflection. Is it going to gap down? Is it going to gap up? Is it going to be non-impacted? But the announcement from Trump saying that you need to create a new insurance premium and it will be guaranteed by us, as in the US, helping those ships get through, but also guaranteeing the insurance premiums basically by taxpayer money. So there was in a sense a bank bailout through this covert action, not really a bailout because they didn't need a bailout, but more socializing losses and privatizing gains in order to get those shipments through. and the closure, what if that is actually enforceable? This becomes a very interesting thing. If this is going to be a long-term war, you'd expect that US could successfully demonstrate that it can provide those insurance premiums, it can take over, it can guide the shipments through, and it can do that. If it can do that, then you'd expect this to be a war for the banksters, for the military industrial complex, that the longer it goes on for, the better. If they can't do that, if they can't get those shipments through, then you'd expect the market to react to that accordingly. Because a lot of what's holding up the market right now is the fact that Trump made that announcement and the insurance shipments may or may not get through. So massive volatility. Already, like every different country is looking at, there was a dependency on Egypt, with and Israel has cancelled various purchases. This is going to have a significant impact already if it gets resolved tomorrow for months to come from the fallout of this. I'm expecting Europe will be a really, really hard, will not be able to recover this. It's going to be austerity. It could trigger a recession across UK and Europe. American stock market will be fine. The rich will get richer, the poor will get poorer. There's nothing new there. But that's what the market is telling us right now. And so if we get an off ramps, a resolution, then officially I think we've reset the world order and this was a global reset. If we get an extended war and the US is able to get those shipments through, then this could be, a longer term geopolitical move of war profiteering that could trigger a global financial crisis and recession similar to 2008 style. That's what I'm seeing in the market so far.
Thanks for that, Simon. I appreciate it. I just want to, the impact that you're covering. When you're talking about like what's likely to happen, I don't know if you, because the different terminologies used, but in Qatar, what was the thing, Brother Ivy, that you read? They've used force majeure as a reason to not, was it produce any more oil? Can you just read what they exactly said?
Uh, yeah, cut off production of liquefied natural gas.
Yeah, that implies to me that Qatar is doing something against their own self-interest in order to coordinate with both Iran and Western financial powers and China in trying to coordinate with the banks to try and get a quick resolution here. Force majeure is essentially a clause in the terms and condition that relates to, disaster, natural disasters, and various other things. But cutting off like production, that effectively, if you were wargaming, that is effectively US waging war on Europe. That's what that means because Europe was 100% dependent upon that Qatar production. And so if they're cutting that off and the banksters are effectively, they were the ones that were responsible for the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, it means that there's a coordinated transnational capital operation in order to vassalize Europe deeper and deeper, as they did with the Ukraine and Russian war, into private control, trigger a recession, and create a massive gas dependency of Europe on America.
Sorry, I'm in between working and life and all the things, but did you guys just see that there was a report that came out? 90% of traffic is cratered in the Strait of Hormuz. And they're actually calling, a lot of conservative economists are actually saying that this could surge oil to 100%, $100 rather, if they keep it closed for another few days. And that's according to Goldman Sachs.
Yeah, it all depends on whether Trump whether his promise is good and they can get things through. If he can, then you'd expect that to kind of control the price of oil temporarily. If he can't get them through, and this continues, then oil is going up and up and up, and it can trigger real, real ramifications globally.
Simon, if you had to make a call from your analysis, I know, we're not trying to force you to make go in and look at crystal ball this, but from your experience analysis, what's your call? Is this short term, long term?
Yeah, I think there's a faction of Iran that is on board with a quick off ramps plan, and there's another faction of Iran in the IRGC that's going all out and is resisting any type of plan that would lead to a short, an off ramps and a deal. I think it all comes between the two internal factions of reformists and hardliners in Iran, and I think what they're on two different paths. And the reason that we're getting decapitation campaigns is to eliminate those that would not be on board of a quick off ramps versus the IRGC members that are looking to go all out basically turn this into an economic nightmare for the world, basically, in order to enforce a change so I think it all comes down to an internal struggle within Iran. That's the decider. And I think China's aligned with the reformist element. The military industrial complex is aligned with all out war. And the financial industrial complex is aligned with the reformist element. So there's an internal struggle. And you can say military is kind of a representation of radical Zionism, versus like the BlackRock factions of the world that are trying to reset the world order. That's what the internal struggle is in America. Iran, there's the reformists versus the hardliners. And then in Israel, obviously, they're trying to remain relevant to the military-industrial complex and continue to do warmongering. That's the battle. It's kind of represented by what happens to the proxies on the Iran side, what happens to the hardliners, and then China and America can effectively apply pressure on both Iran and Israel, and then the Gulf countries are kind of, they're either going to retaliate, which means that it hasn't worked, or they're going to do nothing and expect a off ramps to come through. I'm still favoring short action because long action is a suicide mission. It really is, and we enter into a level of uncertainty that I don't think is factored into the equation right now. So I'm hoping there's going to be a short-term off ramps.
Maersk announces a temporary suspension of accepting shipping bookings to and from the UAE, Oman, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia until further notice.
Okay, so basically the financial industrial complex is enforcing effectively in reaction to Iran, the blockade. And so they're looking to gain leverage in any negotiations that they might be having in order to open up some of the markets and the oil markets and various other things with reformist factions of Iran, is how I interpret that.
Welcome,
I
Ryan. Jump in. What are your
2000%
thoughts?
disagree with all that. Like they're reacting to a war driven by ideology, and it's not insurance premiums or salesmen that are making some plan to just give the Middle East to China or anything like that. They're reacting because they don't want to lose their goods. Like, of course, insurance goes up when ships could sink to the bottom. That makes sense. And no, Trump can't escort the oil out. There's no grand plan where America and China are just to say, you get that, I got that. America already had it. They're not going to give half their shit away to China. They're losing it because they didn't plan this war well. And Iran is just whooping that ass. That's why they're going to lose it. They're going to lose their footprint in the Middle East. That's happening. China does not want oil and gas to be shut down. Qatar is shutting down its LNG because they can't store it and it's not safe to ship it. It's not we're just going to go against our own interests to help the bankers or something. No, they can't get it out. The strait is closed. So they have to turn it off. It's that simple. They are not producing because they're losing. Saudi Arabia is running out of storage as well because they can't ship it. Iran has raped them in the ass. The news I want to give you, though, is in Qatar, there's evidence that they're using PAC-2s, which means 2000, the year 2000 Patriot 2 systems. They're supposed to be using Patriot 3s, by the way. These things have a interceptor percentage of only about 19%. It's not even a missile-to-missile hit. They just blow up near it and hope the shrapnel hits it. So if they're using PAC-2s, they got to be damn desperate. They are so low on interceptors. They're running out of munitions. I think the U.S.'s target bank is gone. That's why they're bombing police stations and fire stations and trucks and painted decoys on the road. They can't get at these ballistic missiles. A lot of even the Iranian aircraft they can put underground. So they really don't know what off ramp they have to get out of this mess. They've bitten off more than they can chew. Israel's not doing well in Lebanon. Their tanks are already getting hit, and their offense hasn't even really started. Everything's falling apart, and now you've got Trump saying, "Oh, look, we've got infinite ammo." No, you don't. You don't. And Pete Hegseth saying, "Oh, just make it go burr," with the factories. And I was explaining that earlier, but there's a lot of new people in the space, so I'll say it again. How utterly stupid what he just said was. It's not a problem with factories. They don't have the supply chains. They don't have the components. They don't have the machine parts. You can't just make more Patriot missiles and cruise missiles. It's not that easy. They're going to lose. Like the only way they got enough firepower to try to get Iran to bend the knee, and they're not going to do it because they're in it to win it. It's an existential threat. Their very existence is at stake. Iran has to stay the course. There's all these rumors saying, "Oh, look, they're about to negotiate." BRICS news. No, they're not. No, that's not happening. They know the U.S. is running out. There was a 4-hour lull today where there were no bombings in Iran. The U.S. and Israel are having to space out their attacks because they're low on munitions and they don't have the ability to replace them. They got outplayed. The U.S. is going to lose its footprint in the Middle East. None of these Gulf Arabs are going to want them back. They weren't protected. All the defense went to save Israel. Their assets weren't protected. They're losing billions of dollars. People are divesting. People are leaving. You've got these campaigns out of Dubai and stuff. And like, "Oh, look, it's safe. Invest." It's over for them. And this wasn't planned out. This is like speculators react. "Oh, yeah, oil's going to go up," because everyone knew the war with Iran was about to happen. Everybody. They're not causing the war. They're just profiting off it because why not? But this war was created for ideological reasons. The Israelis want to remove Iran so that they can annex territory and ethnically cleanse their neighbors.
Thanks, Ryan. Simon, did you want to respond?
Yeah, well, I was just describing what's happening in the markets and how people like the cause and effect is kind of another thing that can be debated, but I think the impact is
It's
still the
cart
same.
before the horse, though. Like, yeah, they do that after the fact, but they didn't create a war to get this amount of profits. There's so many other ways they can make money. This is ridiculous. Like, it's impossible to not raise insurance on ships when there's a battle.
Just
I
really
think
quickly off of
Ryan.
what Ryan said, if that's okay. So there was actually an announcement this morning. I don't know if you guys covered it. I apologize. Like I said, in and out. Tasnim quoted an Iranian intelligence source saying, "There is no truth to what is being promoted about our willingness to negotiate with U.S. intelligence." This has actually come out several times today. They are making it abundantly clear that they are not negotiating.
Nor should they. They've been preemptively attacked 3 times. You can't negotiate with these people. And it's under the guise of negotiations that they got hit with a surprise attack. And again, even when they agreed, all right, you can have our enriched uranium that they got up to 60%, Israel preemptively attacked. You can't talk to these people. They're not losing this war. I mean, they're taking damage. They are taking it on the chin, but they're delivering too. And a stalemate is still a loss for the U.S. The invincibility's gone. They can't sell their defense. "Oh, we'll protect you." That's already dead. That's already dead. Look at Bahrain and Kuwait. That's over. They're going to have to pack up and Yankee go home.
Yeah, for several days, Ryan and I were going over this every single strike, and I kept saying that's logistics, that's supply chain, that's logistics. You're looking at repair parts, you're looking at fuel, you're looking at resupply points, and that's what they've been systematically just decimating. And a note there, Simon gave us a great,
And they haven't.
perfect
That's
announcement
just
on that.
not true, Andrew.
And then, please don't interrupt me. And then what Ryan brings in is this is what I'm glad that Alex brought up here, and that is, I mean, Ivy brought up is we need to get a really back and forth between Ryan and Simon to really get a good look at this. But yeah, I hear what Ryan's saying.
There's no back and forth. I don't have to shift what I say. Like if the military wins, he'll say it's the military industrial complex. If there's peace, he'll say it's the bankers. Like you can just shift back and forth. I've been consistent. It's Zionism. They drug us into war. They took us to Iraq. They took us to Syria. They took us to Libya. You can see the policy papers. You can look at every fucking lie about WMDs came from Jewish neocons that dragged us into war. They wrote a script like Iran is next. This has been the plan, regardless of what was going on in the markets or not, because they planned this decades in advance. We are doing this for Israel. There's nothing to argue about. The APAC wouldn't spend all these millions of dollars to set up pedophile rings and all that if it was automatic already. Like there's no plan. We're not coordinating with China to divide up the world. We are doing Israel's bidding, and it is costing America trillions of dollars and many lives. That's that. I mean, it's like saying the Civil War was started so the bullet manufacturers could sell a lot of bullets because both sides, you look at all the guns, like, yeah, bullets, they made bullets and they made profits, but that is not why we had a Civil War at all. There's ideological reasons behind these wars. And Israel is the one that preemptively attacked Iran. Israel's the one that lied about Iraq. Israel's the one that helped orchestrate 9/11 with Al Qaeda. Like, and they're freely flying into, and they're driving through Syria now to attack Lebanon because ISIS is on their side. Always was. That's always been the case. We are doing their bidding. You've got a bunch of Christian zealots like Pete Hegseth that thinks they're going to cause Armageddon and bring Jesus back. Like, these people are fucking nuts.
Yeah, but hold on. My position hasn't changed. My position is that this is moving to a multipolar world, that there will be a weaker Israel, a weaker Iran, and a weaker America in the region. America will be retreated into a regional power. The military will make up for lost profits in Europe and Central and South America, and there will be regional stability in the Middle East that's enforced through financial transactions and investments. And China will, that China will dominate its region. Now, the justification and the cause and effect and everything in between is up for debate. But my end position,
Why would America cede territory and resources to China? Just like here, you can have
because
the Middle
America
East.
is
We
not a
don't want it.
sovereign country, it's controlled by corporate interests and it's controlled by lobbies.
Well, they ain't
That's
Chinese
a
lobbies.
gross
It's the Israeli
oversimplification.
lobby.
Yeah, but
You look at Larry Fink, you
transnational
look at
capital.
BlackRock, you look at what do they all have in common?
Yeah, but
Look at the
also
CEOs of Lockheed Martin.
No, I
It
agree.
does.
I agree.
They,
While BlackRock's the most, they've got the most amount of assets under administration, but they're not a monolith. They've partnered with transnational capital, which consists of sovereign wealth funds in all sorts of country, whether it be from Norway to the Gulf countries to the Singapore to China. And so it isn't just BlackRock that rules
don't you think
everything.
they can just invest in whoever's winning? Like they're not
Exactly,
deciding
and
that there has to be war.
that's why they're dictating, because they're changing capital flows in order to usher in multipolarity, and that's the whole point. And so, that's what capital markets are saying, and so the result is the same, which is that we don't have U.S. dominance at the end of this, but the only difference, I think, is that some people believe that at the end of this, Israel's going to rule the entire world.
No, dude, I wish we do have these recorded somewhere. Like when the last conflict ended, you're like, yeah, see, that's what I thought. It's because energy, big energy wants peace in the region. So that, and now, like, oh, fuck, it's not big energy anymore because the oil and gas has been stopped production and can't move around at all. Well,
Ryan,
that's because the
everything,
financial insurance
every,
companies are ruling this time. Like, you just sit in different chairs and oh, you got a different explanation for every event that happens. Whereas following Zionism explains them all at the same time.
well, if it were true, then Iran, if Israel does rule the world and they're going to win, then Iran will lose and the whole world will end up in Pax Judaica, and will end up in a Zionist empire. That's what most people believe.
It's
Now,
insane
my
on its face
Well,
for
they're
people
not
to
going to win
think
my
because
that
they are
Israel would
physically
ever
losing the
rule the
battle.
world. It's a tiny country. It has influence, but it is not, has never been, and would never be even a regional hegemon, let alone a global one.
I'll
but
just be
ju-
honest.
but just
I'll be
just to
honest.
be
Hold
clear,
on, Simon.
just to be clear,
Honest.
Ivy, just to be clear, I've gone live every single week on YouTube, so it is all recorded. But my end result has always been the same. It's been consistent all the way through. And when I was up on these spaces saying that the
Do you
US
remember
empire,
me asking you if they go to war with Iran and America attacks Iran with Israel, are you going to change your mind? You're like, yeah. And they did it
oh
twice.
yeah,
No mind
no,
change, though.
I will admit, Ryan, in the detail of the micro predictions, I think you've been more accurate, and I've got things wrong. I've got things right, but the overall analysis, there was a time up here when no one would believe me when I said that America is no longer a global hegemon, and this is actually going to weaken the dollar, and this is going to reset the world to a multipolar world order. At that time, that was a violently opposed, and they'd say Israel rules the world, and there's no chance that will happen. Now, my the macro analysis, I think, is still on track and it's consistent. But yeah, the micro analysis in terms of who's going to do what, when it's going to happen, I'll get some details wrong. But I think, and I'll record it every week and I'll say what's wrong. But I also believe that I'm sharing
It's
the factions of
important to
power.
acknowledge that America is being led around by the nose by the Israelis and that these wars wouldn't happen at all if not for them.
No,
It's not corporate interest. It's ideological.
but that's not
Like
true because
America's going
the
against
dollar
their own interests. Like they were the global superpower. They're not going to be after this. They didn't want that.
But what I'm saying is, America wouldn't be the global power if Israel didn't create the wars for it, because America is backed by war and the dollar has to be rolled over and it has to exert global hegemon power. And that is what is different.
That's so silly. You have it already in peace. The reason people leave the dollar is because of sanctions and war.
Yeah, I was just going to say the way the dollar is structured is it is backed by war, it's backed by a military industrial complex. It has to roll over the Ponzi scheme. It has to dump the debt on the American people. It has to find new ways of spending it. It has to pump it back into the US stock market. It has to create artificial demand for the dollar. It has to enforce nobody being able to compete with it. It has to enforce that the Middle East are not able to come up and do what they're doing right now. And that is the model structurally. Now, whether you have a communism capitalism narrative, whether you have a fake war on terror narrative, whether you hire Israel to go out there and cause carnage, whether you do any of that, that is what the dollar requires. And the only reason we're having a change here is because it's hit the end. The banks are now diversifying into other countries because China rose and said, "Here's a competing model." The competing model is that you don't need a financial banking system that has to have war and has to be rolled over in a debt-based Ponzi scheme, and we can partner with countries.
But you
That's the
already
change
don't.
we're witnessing.
The flaw there is saying you have to have war. You don't. People were using the dollar. Japan uses the dollar. People use the dollar because it's tied to the largest labor market. It's easy to liquidate, and people use the dollar because it's the most like accepted currency. When you have wars, you risk that. When you put sanctions on country and freeze their assets, like they did Russia, like they did Venezuela, like you did Iran, that's when they start looking for a different currency to use, not only for oil transactions but for all foreign trades. By not having war, they already
I agree
won.
with that,
They
but
had it after World War II. They already were the winner.
how did the
Doing all
dollar?
this conflict does the opposite of what you're saying.
No, yeah, I agree with that because now it's no longer enforceable because there is a competing power and people are able to say, I'll work with China and do a deal instead. And therefore, China can exert influence that wasn't there before to create a competing power. But The dollar was not organic. It wasn't a better currency. It wasn't backed by gold. It wasn't any of those things. It was the International Monetary Fund
It had the least
post World.
volatility. That's why
It
they went
wasn't.
to it.
It was the Bretton Woods system that enforced through covert regime change, through death, destruction, rape, pillage, settler colonialism, everything that Israel is doing, everything that Epstein is doing is what backs the dollar, is what caused the war continually. And it's ever since Bretton Woods system, when they
It was
enforced
backed
the
by
world,
gold.
when it enforced the world on the dollar and enforced the world to have the dollar to price oil, it wasn't organic. It was backed by war, death, destruction, and violence. And now it's no longer be able to be
And
enforced.
gold.
You don't
Didn't Nixon
have to
take it off the
use the
gold
dollar.
standard?
It's not forced. You're not, other than Saudi Arabia, which has a special contracts. You don't have to use
The
dollars.
IMF
You
is a
can do bilateral
mechanism.
trades. Countries do it all the
No, the
time.
IMF was a
This isn't about
mechanism.
petrodollars, any of that. It's about Israel. Like, we went to war for that. Like, it wasn't banks or anything saying that Saddam Hussein had chemical weapons under his palaces. It was William
Yeah,
Safire
and
and Judith
very
Miller.
useful for the
Like,
dollar. So
it's not.
the IMF was created in 44 after World War II in order to enforce dollar dominance, to enforce it. It wasn't natural. You got regime change, you got color revolutions, you got taken
To
out, you got
enforce the
wiped out.
common currency for trade. You don't think Venezuela would get on the dollar? You don't think that Russia would love to get back on SWIFT and use the dollar? They do. They want
They
it.
would now because it was initially enforced through war, death, destruction, violence, rape, pillaging, and everything you claim Israel's doing, which was always what backed the dollar.
It's not backed by war. It's harmed by war. That's why people want to get away from it. That's why after the first Gulf War, Saddam was trying to go to the euro once it was available. They'll do anything. The war and the sanctions harm the petrodollar monopoly. They don't back it. They don't enforce it. They got it
It
upside
only
down.
harmed it when there was an alternative rail that was built through a competing power that built a manufacturing base called China. And before that, you had no choice. You just had to submit.
So you could just do bilateral trades, which people do all the time. You don't
I
have. You
completely
still don't.
agree. But
It's
but
not.
America is
It's
backed
not
by
done by force.
psychopathic Zionism war.
It's just because it works. No, like nobody in Thailand needs pesos from Mexico. They want to use dollars because it's the one for the global
Yes,
exchange. Nobody wants to do little different nitpicky currency trades all day from each country to each country.
once it's been enforced, it became the stable currency, just like the pound was. But once it can no longer be enforced, that's the issue. And it was the IMF 1000% enforced the world onto dollar in order to make it where everyone else was printing their currencies. They got inflation, the economies were destroyed, and then they had to invest in these. And then with all that inbound capital, America pumped it into the stock market until they extracted all the wealth from the American people and created more wealth inequality. That's what the dollar was backed by. It was
You don't
systemic, it
think
was
the
structured.
francs and crowns and other competing currencies had more volatility because of World War II and rebuilding their nations, where America was sitting pretty with all their cities intact? Like, they went to the dollar because it had less fluctuation. Nobody wants to do $1 billion trade. By the time you receive your good, you might have lost $1 million because of the currency hike. Like, they used it because it was more stable. And it's more stable because they didn't lose the war.
They used it because America had a military industrial complex that was selling all the weapons and didn't end up getting involved in the war, didn't have anything bombed. But what was the system that was set up prior to that? All of a chunk of Russia's gold ended up in America. A chunk of British gold and all the colonial mercantilism ended up in Fort Knox. A chunk of Germany's gold ended up in America. And once it had 75% of the world's gold, the backing of the pound no longer existed. So they managed to transition through World War One and World War Two, and Zionism was a part of that, obviously. And then once that happened, America used its gold dominance and military dominance and its IMF system to say everybody has to convert their currency. You come off the gold standard and you have to borrow money from IMF. And they launched a Marshall Plan, and then they launched a Cold War in order to enforce debt destruction, this debt cycle, the same thing that the Bank of England did to Britain. And now the Federal Reserve did it to America. And now it's at the end of a debt cycle. And now people have choice because China said exactly what you said. You don't need to do it this way. You don't need to do it through war, death, destruction, rape, pillaging. You can actually trade and build up countries. And then countries suddenly said, okay, I'll sell my dollars, I'll buy some gold as reserves, and now I've got an alternative model with China. That's why everything's changing. And that's the
I
only
think if
reason.
you audit Fort Knox, there's very little there that they say is there.
Also, the
Yeah,
money
because
comes in.
the Fed
That
took that from
America's
Treasury too.
imperialistic. It would have worked, like you just admitted, since China's doing it. It works through peace anyway.
Yeah,
It's not backed by war.
but
That's my
America
point.
is a dominant culture that's backed by war.
What do you mean backed
No,
by
it
war,
has
Simon?
war. It's a warmongering culture, but it's not for the sake of the dollar. It's a warmongering culture in spite of the dollar. It's a warmongering culture because you have a bunch of religious psychopaths that ideologically believe that God gave a certain people land and that they deserve it. And they go in there and they're bombing these people. And it was no giant profiteering off of slaughtering Gaza. It's just pure ethnic cleansing so they could steal.
Yeah, but
It's just what they believe.
yeah, but where did that come from? America was created
Zionism.
because before Zionism, a bunch of psychopathic British and Europeans were allegedly expelling religious persecution, and they did exactly what Gaza did. They ethnically cleansed, they genocided, they raped, pillaged, stole the land, and created
Right.
the
They had
United States of
Christian
America.
manifest destiny. Same thing. Religious zealots stealing
Exactly.
land, and then God gave it to them.
In that case, they just said it was, it's our right as Christians, and we're going to civilize the land, and we're going to take those thugs. And then they did exactly what Israel does. Israel is just a personification of what the dollar has been backed by for its entire history, and the
It's just a
European and the
natural
British
outgrowth of
empires.
Jewish supremacy. So is Christianity.
400 years of this shit we've had.
Right. And specifically, these wars, all these wars in the Middle East, have been based on Israeli policy papers with Israeli objectives and getting America to pay for it.
Getting Americans to pay for it while the American stockholders profited.
Yes, correct.
How did the dollar profit
getting
from the
Americans
Middle East
without
wars?
health care to pay for it. Exactly.
How did the dollar benefit from the Middle East wars, Simon?
Because what you do is that you print $10 trillion to roll over America's debt-based Ponzi scheme. Israel creates the environment that leads for the justification for war. The Middle East are no longer able to unify to create a competing power. And all of that $10 trillion went back into the US stock market with a bit clipped off by corrupt politicians that allowed it to happen. But all of the money ended back in the US stock market. And now 92% of institutional investors 92% of all the stock market value is owned by 10% of the people in America. And so now you can't extract more. But all the value went into extraction.
Yeah, but
in
that
America.
value went like you just said
It caused inflation in the dollar.
It ruined the dollar. It killed the dollar.
Absolutely, because they
so it
didn't
wasn't
care
backing
about
it.
America.
It wasn't backing it. And also you said, as you just admitted, it was a few people who benefited, the people who own the assets. So it didn't back the dollar. It ruined the dollar.
No, hold on. You've got to get this right. Internally, the purchasing power of the individual person was left with the debt, and all the value went up to the stockholders. That's what destroyed the dollar internally.
Yeah, that's not backing the empire. That's ruining the empire.
Relative to foreign currencies, it went up in value because it was enforced by the IMF system, debt war, covert wars, operations, the deep state, Zionism, all of that shit that enforced the world to purchase US treasuries because the dollar was strengthening relative to their currency. And so you had to invest it and lend it back to the US government through the most liquid bond market in the world that funded all the war and required more war in order to get that Ponzi scheme going. Because if ever what happens today happens, where other currencies, gold, strengthen relative to the dollar, then the whole thing reverse, the whole house of cards falls down. And that's exactly what we're witnessing right now.
Interesting.
Yeah,
go
dollar's
on,
not
Ryan.
going
Go on,
anywhere.
Ryan.
We're going to have a war, and it looks like Iran is winning. And there's not going to be a collapse of the dollar. None of this shit's going to happen. They're fighting, and they're fighting for Israeli interests, as they have been doing for the last 30 years. They literally wrote it down. They planned out all the wars. They picked all the countries that resist them, that they want the U.S. to go and destroy.
Well, the dollar
wars in Africa or Latin America, whatever, that would work too. It's a war's a war. We're always in the Middle East, and it's always them.
Well, no, before it was in Europe and it was communism versus capitalism. Before it was whatever, pick your ideology, whether it was Latin and Central America, whether it was Africa, whether it was Asia, whether it was Middle East, it's rape, still pillaging, and it's the same shit. Profiteering from what?
There's always been imperialism, but it's
Exactly,
not
but
because of
that's
the
what
dollar.
backs the dollar.
It doesn't. It hurts the dollar.
You said
He's
it.
going to go in circles on this.
Simon, the first half I understand. I didn't really understand the second half. So the first half I understand is this: so they printed $10 trillion. It went into the stock market, and it caused inflation to the dollar. These things seem bad for the American empire, bad for the
No,
American
you got to
people.
separate
Yeah,
American
yeah. Can you
corporate
explain that
interests from,
like
yeah.
simpler for me?
You have
Thank
to
you.
put America into American corporate interests, the stock market, and Americans. Americans are meant to take on the debt and end up with a weaker dollar internally. The American stockholders end up with all the value and they end up with all of the control. And then they're the ones that control the lobby so that they can control the politicians and make sure whenever that money is printed, it goes to their company. And the more you pay in a pay to play system, the more money you get into your stock and your interest. And so it's wealth extraction from the American people over to the American stockholder. And if you get the 0% money because you're a bank and you can print money, then you can utilize that system to ensure that Americans are left in individual debt, companies are left in corporate debt, and you can co-opt the companies by agreeing to issue them additional capital, and you can do it through the bond market. Bond holders rule, shareholders rule. And guess what? $65 trillion of America is owned by foreign investors, and they're not all Israeli.
You can print money without a war and have inflation and get hold of it first and buy up real intrinsic goods and things. You don't need an excuse of a war in the Middle East. We have wars in the Middle East because of Israel.
You do have wars in the
You
Middle East
took
because
that
of
away.
Israel, and
The
America
reason
is
they
happy with
have
it.
a
Why do you
huge
think you've
lobby,
got these radicalized evangelical Christians that are utilized in order to make sure that that construct is propped up? Because it actually is what propped up the
exactly
empire.
because guess who decides who gets to be in power and who do they want? They want obedient goy. The Christian Zionists, they want the Huckabees. They want the Hegseths. They're obedient. They do what Israel wants. They believe in that stuff. And these are the people with, like, everybody in Congress besides Massey and like 4 others has an AIPAC person. They control the elections. They own the media. I mean, it's just like flat out that you can genocide cities in front of the world and get away with it. No one else could act like that and pull that off. Only them.
Okay. Anyway, well, I've shared how America was backed and what's changed, and and now because there is a competing implementation, China's able to work with Iran. Iran's able to go through what it's going through, and we've had this change in world because America's not a sovereign country; it's run by the banks.
Well, would China have gotten that with Iran if America had not put sanctions on Iran and gone to war with Iran? How about this scenario? Fuck Israel. America just buys gas and oil from Iran. Everybody benefits. But they didn't. Like,
Exactly.
they drove Iran into China's arms because of a policy that goes against American interests because they're favoring Israeli interests.
And I completely agree with that. But why? Because the financial institutions in America partnered with the sovereign wealth funds in China, and they're ushering in a multipolar world so they can hedge their bets, utilize the dollar for as long as they can, extract as much assets until Americans are just left with all the debt, and then they can move capital flows.
Right. But don't you see how they can do that because they can see that? Like, not that they orchestrated it. They see that that's being orchestrated and they just side with whoever's winning. They're like, oh, well, it's China. We're going over here now. They see the policy directive. You look at like the people that actually make decisions, Trump, the people in Congress, like his cabinet and all that. It's a bunch of children. It's a bunch of Christian zealots and stuff. And they know, like, oh, they're going to obey Israel. We know, oh, they're going to go to war with Iran. So they're like, all right, we'll get oil futures. We'll do this and that. But they're not sitting down, smoking cigars and saying, let's divide up the world between China and America. They're like, America's about to lose a lot of territory because of its stupid decisions obeying Israel, and it's probably going to end up with the Chinese. So we're going to invest over there. But it wasn't a plan to get rid of all that leverage they had and just hand it to China.
But that's
I
not
mean,
what
this
they're
is
doing.
dumb.
It's making America. But what I'm saying is they need to diversify their returns. Yes, they hedge. They hedge for every single position. Yes, they have inside information. And yes, Israel was good for their war profiteering. And that Zionism ideology helped them a lot. And it helps a lot for them extracting wealth from the American people over to the American stockholder. And now that they've got to consider other players, it's not that they sat down and have a plan, it's that China said, and the sovereign wealth fund said, that we would like this to happen and we would like a new plan, and here's the profits you can make if you make it happen. Now go down to your your power structure, the Zionist military industrial complex, and it's capital flows that ultimately is determined. Of course there's ideology, of course there's a bunch of radicals that were all radicalized in order to facilitate the profiteering as useful idiots because they didn't know who they were working for. But who ultimately is benefit from this is capital. It's the one that ends up with all the wealth. And Israel right now is being privatized, is being carved up for private interest. And if they actually wanted to do what China did, it would all be national interest and it would all be nationalization. But it's not. It's being, it's a useful tool for committing crimes against humanity, testing technology, using the Palestinians as a laboratory, using North and Central, Northern Africa to test and create brochures. And anytime you need to do something illegal, anytime you need plausible deniability, go get Israel to do it, and they'll believe that we're the ethical people in America and the Jews rule the world. And so when you have your divorce, you've got your plausible deniability, and then Tucker Carlson can come out and expose as a CIA asset exactly the Zionism controls everything. And now it's acceptable to believe that. So they start pushing the algorithms and let Nazis come on spaces and share all this different stuff because they want everyone
Well,
believing
you
that.
know, I'm not one of these people that blames the Jews. I'm not saying
No,
Jews run the
I agree
world
with
just
that.
because
Yeah.
there's a lot of Jews in Israel. Like, that's not what's going on. I've never said that ever. I was not one of these people either that said, when you were like, oh, I had a very heterodox position, I had the same conclusion. It's just a different reason for why they're going to do it. There are Nazis on spaces and stuff, and they hate me. So but I'll tell you this, you can freely go around and talk about the military industrial complex and banks and everything, and you're not going to get canceled or censored. But when you talk about Jewish supremacy and Zionism, and you're accurate, and you talk about who's leading the wars, and you talk about who ran these pedophile rings and stuff, which I did, you get canceled on everything. And usually the one that they make shut up is the one that's accurate.
Anyway, I think I've said what I'd like to say. Ryan, I've got a tremendous amount of respect for you. I learned a lot about all of these Zionism operations. I'll still continue to share your work. I've just got.
I don't disagree with what you're saying. I'm saying that the causes are different. I know there's profiteers, and we all know, yes, they do no bid contracts, and Lockheed Martin rakes it in. Even when there's no war, they get like a $800 billion budget for the Pentagon automatically. And I understand, even with the hyperinflation, whoever buys things first. Whoop, there's my microphone just fell down. Anyway, we have civil discussion. It's fine. We're at war because of Israel, though. And this is what's going on now. It's on the ground. They're invading Lebanon. They need to be destroyed.
All good. Let's end on a point of definite agreement. Israel's a cancer. Israel's a crime against humanity. Israel needs to be destroyed. And let's hope that this
So is
happens.
Christian Zionism.
Yeah.
All these people that believe in end times Armageddon nonsense, that they should never have power over anything. These are lunatics. Whether you think there's a secret banker manipulating them or whatever, they're the ones actually making the decisions and doing these things. So I'm going to blame it on them, and they should never have power. And Hegseth is insane. He's got cross tattoos and stuff all over his body. He thinks this is a crusade. The stuff that ISIS does, they blame on Muslims in general, which is just as stupid, blaming Jews in general. They're like, oh, that's what the Muslims did. All this crap we've heard about Iran, oh, do you know the Ayatollah wanted to rape women in prison? Oh, really? That's what Israel actually does. They're raping the men in prison. What do you think happens to Palestinian women in a jail in Israel? I don't even want to think about it. We all know what they do. These people rape. These Epstein rings, you talk about these hedge fund managers and stuff, which I can name them all. I'm not going to do it again, but guess what? They have in common. And they rape little kids. These are monsters. And it just gives me great joy in a kind of guilty way to watch Tel Aviv burn, because I don't know another solution. You can't negotiate. You can't reason with psychopaths. These be like, at least the Americans, they had to hide it. Like, they had to lie about Iraq. They had to lie about Syria. In Israel, they're like, just, yeah, ethnic cleansing, hooray. They're all for it. Americans didn't like ICE shooting 2 civilians, or 3, 2 dead. They didn't like it. Like, some 80% don't want this war in Iran, don't see the point. But in Israel, love it. The more Arabs you can kill, and they don't even differentiate between Persians and Arabs, the better. It is a psychotic society. It is a rotten cancer. It is an ideology of religious supremacy. It needs to be erased. I don't know how to get rid of it. There's like radical Judaism, which is what Israel is. And it's just a train wreck between all the worst forces of hedonism, profiteering, religious bigotry, all wrapped in one. And you end up with the Zionist. And they engage in ethnic nepotism. They don't rule the world, but they run the United States media, which runs politicians. And it's not just the bribes in AIPAC. It's obviously blackmail rings. We've uncovered it. There's subpoenas now. You can look at them. Lutnick and all these billionaires. These are the top fish. And they're all raping kids. And it's run from an Israeli intelligence operation. That's what Maxwell and Epstein were. So like, they do have a lot of power. Saying they run the world, they don't run China, they don't run Japan, they don't run Asia at all. It's not the world, but it's a big chunk. And it's the United States, like a parasite to a host. But they don't run the American public. Not anymore. They used to have over 50%. Not anymore. Not after October 7th. That's the one good thing that came out of this, at a huge human sacrifice, is the scales fell from people's eyes. And they're like, why are you bombing hospitals? Wait, what are you doing? This is disproportional. Even Pierce Morgan woke up. And that's the only way we're going to get out of this mess, is you have to stop supporting that insane ideology, which I agree has gone all the way back to the Christian bigotry, killing Native Americans. I know. All that, in whatever form, has to die.
Amen, brother. In that we agree. But I think we can also agree that, right now, I personally believe that Israel and the Zionists still have a bunch of power, and we're finding out whether that power can be overcome by Iran, or whether there's, in the end, going to be something that recognizes that Israel has power, Iran needs to exist, and I just can't. Israel suddenly, the world power as it exists today allows Israel to just disappear, America to look weak, and Iran to be shown as the ethical winner. I think that's something I'd
At the
love to
same
see,
time,
but
I
I don't
can't
see
see
it.
China letting Iran fall either. I think what the off ramp, if they start to lose, is America removes its footprint from the Middle East and does sanction relief. And Trump can say, well, we destroyed their navy and we got their missiles, and pack up and walk. But that's not going to prevent Iran from continuing to hit Israel. Like, they've really, really screwed up on this one. They bit off more than they can chew, and I love it.
Yeah, I agree. I think there will be sanction relief. I think China's a player, a very important player. And I just don't see how this doesn't end in some kind of America having their narrative, Israel having their narrative, and Iran having their narrative.
Well, it's going to be difficult, but without the eye in the sky and sharing satellite data with Iran, they would not be, from which the Chinese have provided, they wouldn't have the success they're having. Like, that is vital. It doesn't seem like, oh, they satellites. Well, yeah, that's how they know what they're hitting and how successful it was. They can see straight down, and that's because of China. China is very dependent on Middle Eastern oil. They don't want this war to be long. They didn't want it to happen at all, but they cannot allow Iran to fall, because that would give the U.S. and Israel all of it. They control the Gulf. China would be fucked. So they have a vested interest in Iran pulling this off. They don't need to jump in. Iran is winning. We've gone over it a million times. Like, the U.S. is running out of munitions. They're going to have to come up with some kind of face-saving off ramp soon. They've got about 5 days left, in my opinion, and they're going to have to pull something out. And I think what they're going to do is they're going to leave these little Gulf Arab states and say, okay, we're out. But like, what are they going to get in return? Because you said like they're going to have their narrative. That's a question mark. Like, what? Why? Okay, you're going to suspend your enrichment or something, which they were doing anyway. But I don't know. I don't know what the return could be. It all kind of depends on like how successful Israel is in Lebanon too. Like, well, okay, we'll get this land back or something. I don't see what the leverage they have. I don't know what Iran wants. They want sanction relief and they want the U.S. to get their bases out of their adjacent territories. But what's the U.S. going to get out of this? It's total embarrassment for Trump. He's going to get swept in the midterms with this botched war plus Epstein. Their whole party's screwed.
Yeah, here's where I think there's a bit of nuance. I agree China can't have Iran fall. And I agree that, but is there a faction of power, a different faction of power within Iran? And I think there is. I think there's the IRGC that are going all in, all hard, all ideological in it till the end. And then there is a reformist faction, which I think China is aligned with, that wants regional stability and integration with the GCC and integration with the region. And I think that's where China, America, the GCC are aligned with that faction. And that's where I think is the IRGC going to win, or is the China integrated America reformist version of Iran going to win?
They kind of had two chances already, and Israel just kept attacking. If they don't polish them off, they're just going to reload and attack Iran again for a fourth time. So the IGRC is the faction. There is no negotiation about this anymore. They were very measured after April, very measured after June. This is the third time. They're not going that route because they understand they're liars and you can't negotiate with them. They did everything. They allowed in the IAEA. They inspected weapons. They let them play around with the enrichment levels and all that. They offered it all. And during negotiations, the Americans and Israelis hit them twice. And now for the third time, no, they need to physically win this war, and then they can issue the demands.
But what if this ends up with an agreement that also has, American bases leaving, the GCC countries hedging with, China, Russia, and America, and then security guarantees by China and GCC in terms of enforcing whatever is agreed in the agreement?
I would say that, like, assuming Iran wins, which they might not, but if things stay the pace they're at right now, they're going to win. More than they want American bases out of the Gulf is they want sanction relief. Like, that's their number one. They might accept just that, but I think they can get both. It all depends on the outcome of the war.
That was a great conversation, actually.
Simon and I should just do our spaces.
Yeah. I
I
support that. Yeah, that really was top notch. It was. Simon had some more questions, but it's up to you. You don't have to reopen anything if you don't want to.
Yeah, let's do it. Sorry, I got a bit of a lag on my unmute button.
No, that's fine. Yeah, so I was trying to understand because it's an interesting one, and I thought about it myself because I've had that conversation before with others about if war is good for like the dollar, for the empire, that kind of stuff, right? And so my understanding of what you were saying so far, and I agree with it, and I thought that myself, which is, but it seems negative, right? Because you go to war, you print the money comes in, and it pumps up the assets, which are owned by a few people, but it ruins in my opinion, like the word ruins the currency by inflating it, making the cost of living for everyone go up, and kind of eroding and weakening, in my opinion, the power of the empire. I understood your next step, which was all that money is collected by those asset owners, and then they own the lobbies, and then they print more, and then and with the money printing, they enslave everyone to debt. And something about bonds, I didn't explain. I didn't quite catch that part. And I guess, is that enslavement part of what's benefiting the empire? Like, but it's not an empire. It's just a few people. It's a cabal that's dominating everyone. Is that it, or
Yeah, I
is
mean,
there more to it?
but it
Yeah.
also changes, right? So, for example, the Gulf countries co-opted BlackRock, not to full, but in order to exert influence, you can just buy significant shares, and so the Q80 sovereign wealth fund became one of the larger foreign holders of BlackRock, and then you're able to exert by doing like an IPO, like Saudi Aramco, where you can partner with the investment bank, and then the investment bank gives you a board seat, and then you're able to exert what's right, what you want for your country, not own it, not control it, but you're able to use your influence and your money and your investment in order to influence American foreign policy. And so while most people think like Gulf countries are just subordinate to Zionism, that was just a reality of Israel being a tool for American military to destroy the region. But over time, the countries went through different strategies. Obviously, Iran went down its path, and Saudi went down its path, avoided assassination, had the all the different attempts, went down a more Wahhabi radicalist funding, create training terrorist groups, but then went back to reformists. And eventually you hit the point where as America gets weaker, your influence grows and you're able to de, you know, because Zionism's strength is based upon American strength. So if America falls, Zionism needs to then go and find a new partner, which is obviously India and UAE. But the I've gone off topic here, but what I'm saying is it's people think of things as they've always been. But the second the dollar is not world reserve currency, which currently it's the largest currency, but it's not world reserve currency because gold is now the largest asset, and we're at the stage where Cayman Island, via hedge funds, is the largest lender to the U.S. government. That you're not sovereign anymore, and so you can that means that power is dynamic and shifts based upon how well you play the geopolitical game, and so you can buy your way out through foreign direct investment to be able to influence foreign policy. And we talk about APAC, but APAC has many other lobbies, and there's covert influence as well. So most people will focus on the fact that Jared Kushner manages Affinity Capital Partners. They'll say, oh, that's evidence of Zionist control, which is correct. There's a Zionist element to it. But that's the manager. The manager is subordinate to the board, and the board is subordinate to the shareholder. So who's the shareholders of Affinity Capital? Well, that's the Gulf Sovereign Wealth Funds. And so they can inject billions into affinity partners, and then they can control foreign policy, not just through APAC funding, which is tiny money, 50 to 100 million, and plus all the Zionist billionaires. But their money is insignificant relative to a 50-year regional stability fund that benefits from regional stability. And therefore, you can exert influence and use Jared Kushner as your manager. Because remember, managers are subordinate to shareholder class. And so you can then exert influence given the reality that Israel is there. And there ain't nothing like you can try. You can then have Iran weaken Israel like they are right now, and then someone else can come in and acquire a lot of the assets. And that's why you have this good cop, bad cop relationship between UAE and Saudi Arabia. But everyone's still on the old narrative of they're all under the boot of Zionism. They were under the boot of Zionism because that was a division of the US military industrial complex. And if you don't want to be bombed, you have to put a base in your region. Now, that base is being attacked. And so, what I'm saying is, people think that 5D chess is exclusive to West. It's actually other players that are playing chess as well. And we're used to this Western dominated American supremacist ideology, but that's not the reality anymore. And so does that mean that Zionism continues to fang? Because I would argue that Zionism was a function of Western power, whether it be British imperialists to American imperialists. And so if you're resetting that board, then Zionism loses a chunk of power. But that wasn't the question. I think you were asking about what. Sorry, can you ask the question again, Adam? I think
No,
I
no,
answered it
I think
wrong.
that was a great discussion there. So my question was more around specifically war being bad for the empire and for the dollar. I think from what I understand from what you're saying, it makes me think, you know, um, it was good for a rootless international clique. Because I agree with your structure of how things are set up. Like there's, you know, capital at the top, and then you have managers. But it seems that the rapacious nature of the empire was good only for that rootless clique. It wasn't good for the empire. It wasn't good for the dollar because, like I mentioned before, the dollar was, you know, it was gold backed, removed in the 70s by Nixon. And then obviously the Federal Reserve printing money ruined it. And it might have made many people, not many people, it might have made this group richer than everyone else combined. But strategically, over a long time, since World War II, you know, because after World War II, like the world had gone through 2 world wars, these people had discovered this whole continent with bountiful resources. Everyone else was broke, you know, so there was a boom, a massive boom period. It became the #1 superpower on Earth. But I don't think it was because of war. I think it was just because of the natural state of things. And I think that if they had taken more, you know, bilateral trade and leadership and statesmanly approach, then they would still be the #1 power. Then they still would be the empire would still be at its zenith. It wouldn't be dying. It wouldn't be about to be over. It wouldn't be China moving on and all that good stuff. So I feel like war itself
Yeah.
was like kind of
So
not backed.
So
Yeah.
I completely agree with that ideology, but that wasn't the
Hmm.
Western European American ideology. It was an ideology based upon mercantilism and domination, and removal of competition. And so when you come from an ideology of removal competition, dominate, we must control, and mercantilism combined, which is the extraction of resources through fiat currency. And so what mercantilism was, it was how the British Empire was built. You use fiat currency in order to print money to fund wars so that you end up with the hard money of gold at the end of it, because no one holds a fiat currency because it goes down in value. So the idea of a fiat currency is to extract value over an empire until eventually you burden all the debt on the people. And that's what the central banking system is. So when the Bank of England did it, the British Empire fell when the debt burden was so much and the world got so complicated through controlling all of the different colonies that everyone started uprising and they could no longer exert their influence. And then the same people that created the Bank of England then went and set about what is the power dynamics of the world today? How do we do a transition to the American empire? And how do we set up a Federal Reserve System? And so European powers, like, wealthy billionaire Zionists like Rothschilds, partnered with American power, like the Rockefellers and the Morgans, and their wealth was achieved through oil. And then you created this whole through World War I and World War II. They built a manufacturing base that meant that America could supply all the weapons, and Russia did the same. And so now you had two military industrial complexes that were profiteering from war. But the mechanism, you can then use that war in order to enforce your currency upon your colonies. And so, for example, a classic example is Germany during World War II, when it invaded the Czechoslovakia. The Bank for International Settlements had and the Federal Reserve System. They had similar governance structures. They had the Warburg brothers on the board of both the Reichsbank and the Federal Reserve. And so when Germany was invading Czechoslovakia, their gold was stored at the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve and the Swiss central bank. But when they invaded Czechoslovakia, they called up the Bank for International Settlements, and the Bank for International Settlements was both funding British effort in the war, but also transferring Czechoslovakia's gold to the Hitler Nazi regime. And so you simultaneously get both sides. But what did they do? They took the gold, and rather than move it from the Bank of England, think about this. The Bank of England was holding the gold that was funding part of the Hitler regime, and it was waging war against it from the same British Empire. And so what did they do? They effectively agreed to say this gold used to belong to Czechoslovakia, now it belongs to Germany. And then eventually we had the outcome of the war, and that gold ended up in Fort Knox. But by changing the ownership of gold, you use a fiat currency in order to extract the real resources. And those resources are the means of production, whether it be oil right now, or whether it be semiconductor chips in AI, or whether it be silver in solar panel components or whatever. But a fiat currency is a mechanism for using your military to enforce your currency on the countries that have the resources. And then you take those resources and you don't hold the currency, you end up with the hard money or the stocks that go up in value. And so by printing money, the average person ends up holding money in their bank, taking on debt. But that money is effectively used in order to acquire the resources and the assets and the shares. That means that you outperform the inflation while everyone that's holding the dollars ends up on the wrong side and in debt. And so it's a mechanism for turning every American person into a debt holder through mortgages, credit cards, student loans, whatever. The corporations that comply with the finance houses, the investment banks, they get, they get basically corporate debt and equity stimulus. And the country, the government, by controlling the government, you use your lobby power in order to enforce that the money that is printed by selling government bonds ends up back into the stockholders' interests. And so the bond markets rule the market, the equity holders rule the market, and you are a product. And this is inevitable, predictable, and guaranteed, because how is the dollar created? It's created by borrowing it into existence. And so a dollar is created when you take out a loan or a mortgage or a credit card. A dollar is created when a company issues a bond via an investment bank and they get to purchase it. And when the government borrows, then that's how that's how these dollars are actually created. The government doesn't create the money. It issues a bond through either Federal Reserve, and the bank purchases it with newly created money. So they're able to purchase free money. So whoever can create free money ends up ruling the system and controlling the military, the technology, all the companies, all the board seats, all the lobbies, all the politicians, Senate, Congress, and can have a deep state under the military that controls the CIA, Mossad, MI6, and can run an Epstein blackmail operation in order to get everyone subordinate to your structure. And then you have colonies around the world that enforce that. And in the Middle East, Israel was that colony. And so it's all connected to, the propping up of the dollar. And why do you do things via a proxy like Israel? Because you have plausible deniability, just like you say, it wasn't us, it was those crazy radicalist ISIS Muslims. It wasn't us, it was those crazy radicalist, Zionist Jews. It wasn't us, it was those crazy blackmailed Epstein class evangelical Christian Zionists that took the money and engaged in pedophilia. But you get plausible deniability for the whole system. And then once the whole system breaks, i.e., everyone's in debt, the corporate debt can't be propped up by money printing, then what you do is you do a radical devaluation of the currency, which puts all the capital out of that country into other countries. And then you start the process again. And so in this iteration, it went from the British Empire to the American Empire. The British was left with all the debt, and all the assets went to the banker class. And then the same has happened with American Empire. And now they're looking at creating a new mechanism called ETFs, where when you can't control the currency, you can control access to capital by managing everyone's pension, insurance premiums, and mortgage-backed securities, various other things. But you can control a country by exerting capital inflows and capital outflows, and a country can fight back by keeping their own resources, which is why there's a war with Iran, because Iran nationalized its resources when British Petroleum owned them. And then America or the empire engineers all these stories that justify war, i.e., create strategic tension between Iran and Israel, fund proxies, and have different military bases. And so you engineer the environment of funding every side of a war and having leverage and control until eventually a competing power resists and you have to negotiate with that competing power, which is China. And that's how did they get power to take on the dollar? Well, BRICS formed a unified.
By doing it the proper way, right? By doing it literally the opposite of what they were doing, right? The opposite of this printing and getting for nothing.
Exactly, and this is unmercantilism. So what does China do? China says, we'll keep our own central bank, we won't privatize it. We'll have state banks that effectively print money only in the interest of the local Chinese community. And then we'll take that money back and we'll reinvest it in infrastructure and making China authoritarian, controlled, not a democracy, but better for everybody. And so China did the opposite. And then China took that model and said, well, why don't we decolonize the world from the IMF? And so they created the Belt and Road Initiative and said, here, why don't you take a loan structured to purchasing goods from us? And because we've got this massive manufacturing base that isn't being depleted by banksters and currency speculators, where all of the value ends up in private banking interest, we don't mind investing in you so that you can then build an economy. And the more you grow, the more goods you purchase from us. And so
Oh,
that
wait,
is
Simon.
reverse mercantilism.
Yeah, no, but isn't China doing mercantilism? It's just doing it much harder, while the West essentially isn't doing mercantilism anymore.
The difference is America did private banking interest that controls everything, and so only has a privatization strategy. And so mercantilism is used in order to extract private interest from the people, and the people just become products and debt and collateralized debt obligations. Whereas China said the private interest will never supersede the government, and the government, when it does mercantilism, it will always reinvest it back in its people and back in its
Okay,
partners
wait,
because we want both to grow.
I have to object to that, because here's the main difference between the Chinese economy and the US economy. The US economy, the US government budget does do mass wealth redistribution, but it does it to its people. It does it through Medicaid, Medicare, the Social Security system. There's massive, and this is the bulk of our budget, is that we're essentially just investing in, quote, the people, like you would say. China does the opposite. China's social welfare system is absolutely bare bones, minimal. It's like nothing compared to what it is in the West when you look at the percentage of the government spending. But what they do in China is massive, massive corporate welfare for all of their industry. And this is how they're able to be so mercantilist and able to have such export dominance, because the Chinese government invests such a huge portion of the tax money into subsidizing and building up and promoting these industries so that the industries can sell at the cheapest prices in the world, right?
Here's the difference. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security is just a mechanism for extracting value over to the fund managers. And so the fund manager ends up with all the value and they manage the assets. And so it's a special subsidy for private interest. Whereas the banks in China are state banks that are controlled by state interests. And then what they have is a mechanism, and you may be right. I mean, there's things they get wrong, and it does lead to malinvestment. And maybe they don't focus on the right things. But the difference is that all the value is maintained in within the country rather than having these private interests that end up with all the value. And the reason they do that is because what we're seeing right now is that the government is subordinate to those financial interests through lobby and capital accumulation. And so now you end up in a situation where whoever buys American assets controls America, and whoever buys the American government controls America. And then they start using America for their own interests globally.
Well,
And that's what's
yeah,
happening right now.
correct me if I'm wrong on this, but let me put it this way. So the United States pays out this enormous, I mean, trillions of dollars in welfare, both in the medical system and outside of the medical system. You know, for example, food stamps alone, it's like $100 billion a year. And when we give all this money to people, and mostly like poor people, but not entirely, they can spend that on anything. And it's consumerism, and they do it with consumption. They spend it disproportionately on consumption, right? Because the poorer someone is, the more they consume with what money they do have. And they can consume anything. There's no limitation on it. So they buy products not only from the United States, but also imports. And this drives America as a net importer. Whereas China, by taking that money and focusing it on its export driven industries, it's taking its money and it's not subsidizing imports, it's subsidizing exports. So it's the exact opposite. So you end up with a situation where China is the mass producer and America is the mass consumer. Does that sound right?
Yeah, exactly that. And the key to sustainability for the people is to do what the corporate interests do. So the corporate interests, they take their money and they use it to invest in assets that outperform inflation, whereas the consumer in America takes it and buys things that are value destruction, and so they don't end up ever beating inflation. And so now the vast majority of Americans don't beat inflation, whereas everyone in China owns their own real estate, like 99% or something, and they've got savings. And so they're able to outperform the inflation. While as in America, because it's a Ponzi scheme by nature and it's privatized, those that get to issue the money at 0%, which is the private banks, they end up with all the assets, and Americans end up with all the debt, unless you're incredibly savvy and you don't use your money to consume and you use your money to purchase assets. But unfortunately, because you get this inflation side effect, most Americans are now dependent upon consumption through credit cards.
Yeah, so put simply, it's like it's about keeping the money printer on as long as possible and getting as much something as you can get for nothing. Whereas China went the other way, the proper way, which is you're supposed to produce something to get something, and it's more of a Ponzi scheme on the American side. So we can, because yeah, like we've outlined, you print the money, you keep the world poor. So they have to keep giving you real things for printed money. Uh, but yeah, it's not a good long-term strategy.
And yeah, and then you're radicalized into believing that there's something called capitalism versus communism, when the reality is there's just resources and how those resources are distributed and who benefits from them. And so the whole psyop of capitalism versus communism was really just the justification for this mercantilist extractive model. And then anytime you try and do some distribution, you're called a radical lefty. And guess what? Both win by the banks, because the left ideology, when you invest more in social welfare programs, end up with the asset managers or the insurers managing the money. And then if you go to the other side, you get a deregulation environment where all the money goes to the shareholder class and the lobby class. And so both systems are value extractive, because at the base, the Federal Reserve System is a debt based Ponzi scheme that is designed, inevitable, predictable, guaranteed, to end exactly where we are today, where you devalue the currency and all the assets have been extracted into fewer and fewer hands. And then private control takes over and resets the order by negotiating with foreign interest, which is why I believe in the debate we had transnational capital is sending the world into a multipolar world, and they have the ability via their control of the US military industrial complex to engineer a war and use their colonies like Israel and even, groups like ISIS and all these different ideologies that they create in order to fuel the tensions. Strategic tension was a game. It's got a name. Read the book by Paul Williams called Operation Gladio. It's where you create these stay-at-home militia armies, you fund every side, and you create strategic tension. Iran and Israel is perfect example. For 40 years, they never blow each other up, but they create the environment that justifies $10 trillion of war.